Everyone. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about Beowulf. Some of you are probably familiar with this poem already. Maybe you had it in high school or somewhere else, but for some of you, this may be your first time encountering this epic poem. So what we're going to do is look at, for your readings, just three parts of Beowulf, the three battles that he is part of. So what we're going to do to begin with is sort of talk about the context of the poem and then talk a little bit about the format of the poem and then talk about the themes of the poem. So if this gets to be too long, I'll break it into two parts so it uploads faster. So Beowulf, the poem, doesn't have a specific author. We don't know who wrote it. As far as scholars can tell, it's sort of pieced together from oral tradition. So this would have been a piece of oral literature, stories that were told, as poets traveled around from place to place to entertain people and tell these stories. They had large parts of Beowulf memorized, and this one author sort of puts it all together into one document. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, we only have one or two copies of the poem. That's all that was left, and that one was badly damaged in a fire. So what we do know about it is it was written in England, but it looks back to a previous time period. So we're thinking somewhere between the 8th and the early 11th century. The dates change depending on which scholar you talk to. But the time period in the poem itself when the action takes place is a much earlier time and is set in Scandinavia. All right. So I included some slides here that you can look at on your own. I have a link to the Sutton Hoo official site. It's an excavation where they found a lot of material that's of objects, helmets, types of ships, and whatnot that are mentioned in Beowulf. Beowulf kind of lends some authenticity, some historical authenticity to the poem. And so you can look at this at your leisure. I have the PDF attached. All right. For example, you'll see this these kind of helmets a lot, particularly the one on the cover slide here, the Beowulf helmet here. It's mentioned in the poem. And you can see in these figures they're wearing boar helmets with that kind of figure of the boar on it. And these are mentioned in Beowulf itself. And this is a picture of kind of what the hall, the Heorot hall, would have looked like at that time. All the men would have been in the same hall together. They'd sleep around the edges and the fire would be down the middle. So this was sort of their sanctuary. This is where they hung out and felt safe. So our main characters, Beowulf, the king of the Danes, Grendel, Grendel's mother, the dragon, and his of course, Beowulf's nephew, Wiglaf. Lots of other characters, but these are the ones you're going to be need to be most familiar with, at least in passing. So let's talk about the form of the poem for just a moment. When poets have to memorize big chunks, and these poets, these scopes they were called, here's the word here, scope. These were poets who traveled around, and they're sometimes called bards. You had them all throughout history. They'd go around and tell these stories from town to town, and they'd get paid for doing this. For example, the Iliad and the Odyssey are long epic poems that were oral at one point. And in order to memorize these big chunks of poetry, they would use mnemonic devices, certain catchphrases that would allow them to remember what came next. And a lot of these stories could be told in different ways. They would just have a chunk of text that would remind them of what came next, and they could improvise on that. So it wasn't exactly word for word, but they're mnemonic devices. And among these devices we have alliteration and kennings. So let me see if I can get through those before I run out of time here. So some background information about oral tradition if you're interested in that, those couple slides. Alliteration is it says here, the use of repetition of initial sounds. So my example that I pulled from Beowulf is, at times some hero made the timbered harp tremble with sweetness or related true and tragic happenings. So we have the TIM here. So alliteration is not just the first letter, but is often parts of the word, like the TR sound in tremble, true, and tragic. That's what alliteration is. And I picked some more from our Shamus Haney's translation that we're using in the textbook, and I've underlined those alliterative passages. So that's one device that was used. Another one is called kennings. A kenning, again, the definition here, a short metaphorical description of a thing that's used in place of the thing's name. So what you're going to see as you read through it are lots of these hyphenated words like sea rider or ring giver. A sea rider is a ship, right? A ship rides on the sea, or you see the sea road. A king is a ring giver. Giving rings was something that kings did. They gave valuable jewelry and armor and all sorts of things to their loyal followers. So a king was a ring giver. So you'll see a lot of those. You can see just from the few lines here how many of them I have circled. So that's the form of the poem, and on the next video we'll start talking about the themes.